Welcome back, Soul Family. Today I've decided to commence a reading of Murry Hope's book, The 9 Lives of Tyo. Having just read it and been deeply emotionally impacted, I feel it is perhaps the most relevant book to our message here that could be shared. I believe sharing this book openly to be appropriate, given that it is out of print and there are few copies available. Here is the description from the back cover. The 9 Lives of Tyo, Murry Hope. A story which can be enjoyed by both animal lovers and believers in extraterrestrials alike. Tyo is one of a very advanced race of felines called Paschats, who come from a planet in another solar system. When allowed by his planetary neighbors, the Crystal People, to look in on Earth, Tyo is greatly distressed by what he sees and pleads with the Old Ones to allow him to travel to Earth to help humans and animals develop a better understanding of each other. The Old Ones grant his request and allow him 9 lives on Earth as a lioness in the Hall of Judgment in ancient Atlantis, a temple cat who is a favorite of Pharoah Akhnaton, a wild jaguar in the jungles of the Amazon River, a little cat in Italy during the Black Death, a pampered pet of Cardinal Richelieu, a tomcat aboard a sailing ship in the 18th century, a Bengal tiger during the period of the English Raj, a self-sacrificing Russian blue during the Soviet Revolution, and a much-loved Somali kitten in present-day Wales. During each life, Tyo meets many of the same animal and human friends, albeit in different guises, for the relationship that binds them together transcends time. The atmosphere and historical events of each period, as seen through the eyes of Tyo, are vividly described, while the feelings of his human and animal friends are also poignantly expressed. And therein lies the appeal of the 9 Lives of Tyo to people of all ages. The rest of this series will follow a per-chapter basis audiobook format. I encourage you to dive deep into your imagination for the imagery of this story. Without further ado, here is my reading of The 9 Lives of Tyo. Introduction: The Planet of the Paschats. If you look into the sky on a clear winter's night, you will see a very bright blue-white star twinkling merrily away on its own. But it isn't really alone. It has a companion star which is very, very small and not so bright, and can only be seen through very powerful telescopes. This was not always so, however, for there was a period when the smaller star-sun was much larger and shone with a golden light, just like our own sun. How it came to shrink and what happened in that solar system as a result is all part of another story that I might tell you someday. But for the present, my tale concerns the 2 star suns as they used to be, and 2 planets that regularly orbited them, one slightly smaller than Earth, and the other one a little larger. Long, long ago, when our own solar system was in its infancy, on the smaller of these 2 planets there lived a race of beings who were not like you and me. They were of the feline species, which means they looked more like our cats, lions, or tigers, except that they walked upright on 2 legs like we do. They were called Paschats, which means cat people. As well as being clever and very wise, they were gentle and kind, and soon made good friends with their planetary neighbors. The days and nights on the smaller planet were not short like ours. They lasted for long periods. During this time it was cold and very dark indeed, and everyone stayed home and rested. Then would come the medium light days when the rays of the golden star sun lit up the little planet for a while, And finally, the very bright days would come when the big blue star sun smiled happily upon it. It could be very warm then, especially in the places where the crystals grew. But this was as it should be, as the crystals were fed by the big star sun's energy and supplied the power that met the needs of the people during the dark periods. Now the larger planet was called Ishna, and the people who lived there were known as the Crystal People. They were quite different from the Paschats and more like we are on Earth, except that they were smaller, slighter, and very fair, and their bodies had a crystalline look about them. Beautiful crystals grew in their world, which they used for many wonderful things, like storing energy and space travel, knowledge which they passed on to the Paschats. Their scholars were particularly good at things like mathematics and astronomy, but they were not a physically strong people, whereas the Paschats were very powerfully built and also quite practical, so the two races together made a good team. In fact, the Crystal People had told them that they were about the strongest race they had met in the many galaxies to which they had traveled. Paschats had a very strict but happy way of living. Young Paschats always looked after the old ones, for with age went wisdom, and grandparents in particular were treated with great reverence. There was lots of free time for the young ones to enjoy themselves, but there was also much to be learned. You see, it was not just their own planet and Ishna that they studied at school, but also the many other places that their elders and the Crystal People had visited during their journeys through space and time. Both the Paschats and the Crystal People knew lots of things that we haven't yet discovered, as their science was a long way ahead of ours. For example, they had learned how to use time warps to travel to other galaxies, and their studies had also taught them that on some distant planets there were animals, birds, and plants who were not as happy and well cared for as the creatures in their own worlds. This made them very sad, and they were most anxious to understand and help both their own kind and others who were not so fortunate. But the old ones who created the many universes also made certain rules, one of which was that one must never interfere with life on other planets. However, there are always special situations that call for an exception to every rule, which is what this story is all about. In Pascha land, there lived a young boy lion, or cub as we call them, whose name was Tyo. He was a twin, just as all Paschats and Crystal People were, which had something to do with there being two sons, and his sister was called Taku. Like other young felines, Tyo and Taku had learned at school all about other worlds and the creatures that lived in them. So while they were still quite young, they decided that when they grew up, they would like to be cosmic historians, which means that they would study the minds and customs of all those beings that their elders and the Crystal People had discovered during their travels through the universe. In Tyo's world, there were no wild animals. All was gentle and well-ordered, and everyone respected, loved, and understood every other living thing. This meant that the birds, trees, plants, and fairy folk were all able to talk to each other, which was both very interesting for everyone and a lot of fun. Plants did not stay fixed in the ground like they do here on Earth. They could pull up their own roots and move around, which was why every Pascha home had a special room that had beds of soft green earth, green being the color of the soil in Pascha land, where a passing plant could put up for the night or even stay longer if it so wished. It was the custom that when a plant accepted the hospitality of a Pascha home, it would always leave an offering of its fruit, leaves, or seeds, and as these visits were frequent, nobody ever went hungry. Of course, Paschats never killed plants by pulling them out of the ground to eat because there was no need to. You see, some of the plants preferred to live together in big communities, either in the open or among the trees, so all a Pascha had to do was to pay them a visit, and he or she would be given all the food they needed and more. Paschats did not think of pets in the same way as we do, but rather as friends and equals. Tyo had a plant friend called Gilly. Sometimes he would take Gilly into his own special room where he had a nice tray of green soil, and Gilly would stay with him for the long sleep. In addition to his family, Gilly and his feline friends, Tyo was also very fond of Periwin, the big blue hen who regularly laid the delicious green eggs of which Tyo was particularly fond. But nobody actually ate each other in that land, and apart from the eggs of the blue fowl and those that the water serpents kindly gave them, Tyo, like all other Paschats, lived on the gifts of fruits, nuts, berries, and vegetables of all kinds that he and his family either received or collected from the friendly trees and plants. You may well wonder what Tyo and his family looked like and whether they wore clothes like we do. Try to imagine a lion standing up on its hind legs, and that will give you some idea. Although Paschats had become shorter over the long generations when they had learned to stand erect, they were still a little taller than most humans. Tyo's face was much smaller than that of an African lion, and his features more refined. His fine, thick mane, of which he was very proud, was a pale golden color and neatly brushed, just as people here care for and fashion their hair. His ears were more pointed than those of our lions, however, and more like lynxes. Paschats came in several colors. There were brown Paschats, golden-colored ones like Tyo, white ones, and mixed ones who sometimes had brown bodies, pale manes, and striped legs. Oh yes, of course, they had tails. Female Paschats, like our lionesses, did not have manes. Their ears were much larger, however, and if you would like to see what a Pascha really was like, you should visit the Egyptian room in any large museum and look at the statues of Sekhmet and Bast. The ancient Egyptians knew all about Paschats because in the very early days of their civilization, some had actually met them, while others had heard of them and the crystal people from the Atlanteans. But that is part of the next chapter, as you will see. What did they wear? Well, although their coats were not as thick as those of some creatures on Earth, they were still quite furry by our standards, so they did not need lots of clothes. But they liked bright colors, and their simple garments, which were a little like those worn by the ancient Greeks, were very colorful indeed and often covered with pretty stones and pieces of shining metal. They were also very partial to belts and buckles, and it was the custom for everyone to have his or her own special buckle, which was usually made magically by the Pascha metalsmiths living in the mountain caves who, legend has it, had been taught their arts by the old ones themselves. Because all the different creatures could talk mind to mind, we call it telepathy, it did not matter whether they spoke each other's language or not, since words were not necessary. Nor did the Paschats think that they were the wisest beings on their planet. In fact, there was an ancient tree named Timbal living in one of the dense forests who was believed to be wiser than anyone else in Pascha land. All of the elders of Tyo's race, including his own mother and father, went to consult Timbal whenever they were in doubt about something. But Timbal was very, very old and inclined to sleep for long periods, so everyone had to wait until he woke up before they could talk to him about their questions and anxieties. Because there were no wars, sickness, or cruelty, most of the problems that arose were either about personal matters, the weather, which could be very troublesome at times because of the orbit of the two star suns, or the search for knowledge about other places in the universe, because Paschats were, like all cats, very curious. Now, Tyo's father was a very wise Pascha who had traveled in a spaceship with other elders of his pride to visit the crystal people. When he returned from his journey, he told his children about the wonderful double pyramid crystals they had, which you could look into and see what was going on in both the past and present in other parts of the universe. You see, both the Paschats and crystal people understood all about time and how to move backwards and forwards through what they called cosmic time zones. There was one story which really made Tyo and his sister cry, and that was about a beautiful blue planet far away where felines didn't stand up straight but walked on all four legs. "It is a sad, sad state for our people there," Tyo's and Taku's father said to them. "Some of them are large and very wild, and no one has understood them since before the blue planet had its great flood. Other felines are gentle and much smaller, but they are treated as possessions and not as equals at all. In fact, even the humans who rule the planet do not seem to know about the life force that is in all living things." "But why can't we travel through time to this planet and teach them?" Tyo asked. "Because, my son, you have many things to learn first. There are rules which must not be broken, and it may not be the will of the old ones that we should interfere just yet, or even at all." "But there must be some way," Tyo pleaded. "In time, Timble will tell you what you should do, but meanwhile you must learn as much as you can about the ways of other worlds, for they are not all as kind and caring as ours." Tyo, being a sensible little lion, was forced to agree. Tyo and his sister grew to be strong and wise, and when they were older, each took a mate in the same way that people here get married and raise families. Tyo's wife was called Shauna, and she was what we would call a doctor, although Pascha medicine was very different from what we have on Earth. And Shauna made a special study of the way all creatures think and feel, because they do, you know. And this not only included her own species, but also the plants, birds, trees, other animals, and even their planet itself, to which the crystal people had given the name Kitsat Etu, the place of the cats. In fact, Paschats had always known that planets and star suns were living beings with minds and feelings of their own. In time, Tyo and Shauna had twin cubs, and life passed slowly and happily for them all. One day, when Tyo was quite old by Pascha sun years, Timble sent a message for him to come and visit. Tyo made his way to the depth of the forest where Timble lived and approached the Wise One. "What have you to tell me now that I am growing old? For I will soon shed this tired pelt for a new one," Tyo asked. "You have worked hard and learned much, Tyo," Timble replied. "And in view of what you have always wanted to do since you were a cub, the old ones have decided that you are now ready to go to the blue planet that orbits the single yellow sun. On that planet there is much sadness, which you will be able to learn about and record to bring back to your ancestors when you finally return to them in many light years' time." Timble and the Paschats knew that all time is really one, which is a secret that the people on the blue planet had not yet discovered. You will not be permitted to time travel there and appear as a Pasha for two good reasons. Firstly, it would give you an unfair advantage over the creatures that live there, and secondly, you would most certainly frighten them, especially the humans who would attack you and try to drive you away. Besides, how can you learn to feel and suffer as they do unless you are born amongst them in a form familiar to them? This will mean, of course, that you will grow up there knowing things that they do not, but you will not be able to tell anyone. Apart from a very few who will be aliens like yourself, most of the natives have not learned to use their minds to talk to other species. In time, however, after their planet has had 2 changes in its axis, they will develop that gift. But for now, proud feline, remember what I have told you. When you arrive there, be prepared to see and experience things that your race has either never known or long since forgotten. What sort of things, please, Timbal? Tyo asked the old tree. Tears, pain, suffering, hatred, rejection, but also caring, warmth, and most of all, love. But never fear, you will not be alone there, for Taku and Shauna have chosen to go with you. And your father, who shed his pelt 4 sun cycles ago, is also waiting to join you. You will also meet a few of the crystal people on the blue planet. But a word of advice. Do not expect everyone to look as they do now, for they will not be wearing the bodies that you are used to, just as you yourself will have to bend and walk on all 4s once again, as your people did in times long past. While you are there, Tyo, you will always be born into a feline form, but because the humans on the planet do not speak our mind language, your sister Taku has agreed to be as one of them. Now it is only on very rare occasions that the old ones allow this to happen, as it is particularly difficult for a feline to adjust to a human body. The 2 species are so different it will be uncomfortable and frustrating for Taku at times, but she is strong in mind and spirit and is willing to take on the challenge. Together you will be able to give help, comfort, and love to many. Before Tyo could ask any more of the questions that were spinning through his head, Timbal continued. No, I will not tell you any more, but go with my blessing and that of the old ones. Never lose faith in who and what you are, and remember, true cosmic love is the greatest force in the universe. With that, the old tree bowed its massive head and slipped peacefully into one of its long, long sleeps. And that was how Tyo first came to know that he would be going to the blue planet that we call Earth. In time, Tyo, Taku, and Shauna each shed their old furry bodies and joined their ancestors in the realms of the old ones to rest with their kin before taking on their big tasks. Paschats, like the crystal people, had always known that bodies were only something one wore for a little while in order to look in on and learn from different cosmic time zones.